A pleasant day to each and every one, especially to our professor, Mr. Novi Carlo Nasibug, MPA. I am here, the Group 12, the topic entitled The Philippine Legislature, the Martial Law Period. Before we proceed to our topic, let me introduce myself. I am Lovely Ethel Primor, the presenter. So first, let us discuss the learning objectives. First, describe the modified form of parliamentary form of government during the martial law. The second one is describe the structure and organization of the interim Batasang Pambansa. The third one is discuss the implication of the socio-economic profile of the members of the Batasang Pambansa to policy making for national development. The last one is analyze the impact of the unicameral structure of the Batasang Pambansa and the Budget Reform Decree of 1977 on legislative policy making. So first, let us discuss what is martial law. So a martial law is the replacement of civilian government by military rule and the suspension of civilian legal processes for military powers. So martial law can continue for a specified amount of time or indefinitely, and standard civil liberties may be suspended for as long as martial law continues. Legislation by Presidential Decree. From the time he declared martial law, President Marcos exercised legislative power through his issuance of presidential decrees. The letters of instruction. Many of the initial presidential decree issued were actually pending legislation in the Congress. For example, Presidential Decree 1, the Integrated Reorganization Plan, has been submitted to Congress for approval but had not yet been acted upon. As will be seen later in this chapter, even after the new legislative body was organized, President Marcos continued to issue presidential decrees that became part of the law of the land. So let us proceed. The 1973 Constitution modified parliamentary form of government. So the 1973 Constitution provided for a modified parliamentary form of government. Legislative power was to be vested in the unicameral National Assembly, whose members were to be elected by qualified electors. Assembly members were to serve for a term of 6 years. The National Assembly was to elect by a majority vote from among its members the President of the Philippines, who shall be the symbolic head of the state. He was to serve for a term of 6 years and was to cease to be a member of the Assembly upon taking his oath of the office. The Constitution provided that the executive power was to be exercised by the Prime Minister with the assistance of the Cabinet. The PM was to be the head of the government. The PM was to be elected by a majority of all the members of the National Assembly from among themselves. So let's proceed. What is the President of the Philippines? The President of the Philippines, who shall be the symbolic head of the state. The President was ineligible to hold any other office during his term. A Prime Minister was be the head of the government and was to be elected by a majority of all the members of the National Assembly from among themselves. The PM was to appoint a Deputy Prime Minister from the members of the National Assembly. The Cabinet. The PM and the Cabinet were to be responsible to the National Assembly for the program of government and shall determine the guidelines of the national policy. So the Cabinet, the PM and the Cabinet were to be responsible to the National Assembly for the program of the government and shall determine the guidelines of the national policy. And the last is the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister is the head of the ministry and perform other functions as may be assigned to him by the Prime Minister. So let us proceed in interim Batasang Pambansa. The interim Batasang Pambansa was to have not more than 120 members, later increased to not more than 200 members. It would comprise the incumbent President of the Philippines, representatives elected from the different regions of the nation, those who shall not be less than 18 years of age to be representative from the youth, industry, and agricultural sectors elected by the respective councils, and those chosen by the President from the members of the Cabinet. The IBP was to have the same powers and its members were to have the same functions, rights, privileges, responsibilities, and disqualification as those of the Interim National Assembly and the regular National Assembly provided for in the 1973 Constitution. The qualifications of members of the Batasang Pambansa. The qualification of individuals for election to the Batasang Pambansa were identical to those of the members of the defunct House of Representatives. First, natural-born citizen of the Philippines, at least 25 years old on the day of the election, able to read and write, a registered voter in the constituency in which he shall be elected and a resident thereof for not less than 6 months immediately preceding the day of the election. Privileges of members of the Batasang Pambansa. Members of the Batasang Pambansa enjoyed practically the same privileges as the members of the defunct Congress. They receive a fixed salary. They were privileged from arrest for offense punishable by not more than 6 years imprisonment during their attendance at the Batasan. They were given parliamentary immunity. They could not be questioned or held liable in any other place for any speech or debate made during the Batasan session and in the communities. Similarly, the members of Batasang Pambansa were subject to a number of prohibition. They could not hold any other office or employment in government during their tenure except that of a Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Cabinet Minister, or Deputy Minister. Members of Batasang Pambansa who were lawyers were prohibited from appearing a counsel in certain specified cases. All Batasang Pambansa were prohibited from having any financial interest in any contract, franchise, or privilege granted by the government. So next is powers and functions of Batasang Pambansa. The primary function of the BP was to enact the laws of the land. For this purpose, it held regular sessions commencing on the fourth Monday of July each year. Unlike the defunct Congress, which had its regular session limited to not more than 100 days, the BP was designed to be continuously working body, shall continue to be session for such number of days as it may be determined. It could also be called to session at any time of the President to consider legislation which he may be designate. And the exercise, it is a lawmaking power that the BP was constrained by a number of constitutional limitations which were practically the same as those imposed on the defunct Congress. Some of these were contained in the Bill of Rights and expressly prohibited that BP of enacting laws that would in any breach such as basic rights as the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly or impair the obligation of contracts. So the next is the BP was similarly forbidden to grant titles of nobility and may not enact any ex post facto law or bill of attainder. There were also express limitations on the Batasan's power and the power to appropriate public funds. Besides the power to enact the law, the BP was given the sole power to declare the existence of a state of war by vote of 2/3 of its members. The BP also had the power to allocate government resources and regulate the use of the national wealth through its power to enact tax and tariff laws, the Annual Appropriation Act. In addition, it must be mentioned that the BP had the power to ensure the accountability of public officials to the people. This was chiefly through the power to initiate, try, and decide all the cases of impeachment by two-thirds vote of its member officials, removable by impeachment for treason, bravery, high crimes, graft, and corruption, include the President, Vice President, Supreme Court Justice, members of the Constitutional Commission, and other provided by law. Again, because of the KBL majority, an impeachment case against President Marcos did not prosper beyond the committee stage. To summarize, the BP possessed several powers. First, legislation, to oversee administration, to declare war, to tarify treaties, and to impeach officials. This power had been similarly exercised by the defunct Congress, but compared with the latter, the BP was much weaker legislative body. This was, first of all, due to the semi-parliamentary features of the government, where the Prime Minister was both member of the executive and leader of the majority party in the BP, and could therefore, it necessary use his influence with the President to cause the dissolution of the legislature over fundamental issues. Second, because of the unbridled legislative power granted to the President under amendment. The BP also did not have the power to pass upon the appointments made by the presidents, except for that of the PM, which the former Congress exercised through the Commission on Appointments. And that's all, everyone. Thank you and more power.